The morning light slipped through the stained glass windows of St. George's Church on Hanover Square, breaking into colored shards across the marble floor. 400 members of London's highest society filled the pews, their silks whispering as they leaned forward in anticipation. This was not a wedding of joy, it was a wedding of pity. Every eye was fixed on the closed doors at the back of the church, waiting for a bride no one had seen in 8 years. At the altar stood Lord Julian Ravenscroft, Duke of Winterbourne. His posture was perfect, his expression controlled, yet the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. At 31, he was striking in a severe way with sharp cheekbones, pale blue eyes, and hair the color of dry wheat. He looked every inch the powerful Duke, but inside he felt hollow. Sleep had not come easily in weeks, and the weight of duty pressed down on him with every breath. Julian had agreed to this marriage with full knowledge of what he believed awaited him. A woman hidden from society after a terrible accident. A face ruined beyond repair. A life of quiet separation. The bargain was simple and brutal. £100,000 now, $5,000 a year after, in exchange for his title and his name. Winterbourne would survive. That was all that mattered. Love had never been part of the agreement. The organ swelled, deep and heavy, and Julian clenched his hands at his sides. This was the moment. The moment his future would be sealed. The church doors opened. Lady Camilla Worthington appeared at the threshold, and the sound that rose from the crowd was not horror but shock. She moved slowly down the aisle, her posture calm, her steps measured. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and fine lace, glowing softly in the morning light. But it was the veil that commanded every gaze. Layer upon layer of thick white tulle fell from a crown of pearls, hiding her face completely. It was not delicate or teasing. It was a barrier. A shield. Julian forced himself to breathe as she approached. He told himself not to imagine what lay beneath the veil he had prepared for years for this moment. Prepared to look without flinching, prepared to do his duty. Whispers followed her path down the aisle. Poor thing. Such a tragedy. The Duke is noble to accept her. Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Camilla reached the altar and stopped beside him. Through the veil, Julian could see only the faint outline of her features, nothing more. Her gloved hands were steady as she passed her bouquet to her attendant. The Archbishop cleared his throat and began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the church. Julian heard the words but did not truly register them. His thoughts were already moving ahead, separate chambers, minimal contact, a marriage fulfilled in name and law only. Order would be maintained. When it was time to speak, Julian delivered his vows clearly, though his chest felt tight. The words sounded empty even to his own ears. Camilla answered in a calm, composed voice that carried through the layers of her veil. There was no tremor in it, no sign of fear. The ring slid onto her finger, warm against his skin. Then the Archbishop paused. "Before I pronounce you man and wife, the groom must unveil his bride." A hush fell over the church. Julian's hand shook as he reached for the veil. He lifted one layer, then another. The rustle of fabric sounded unbearably loud. The final layer fell away. Julian froze. The woman before him was not scarred. She was stunning. Her skin was smooth and pale, her features perfectly balanced. Dark hair framed her face, her lips full and soft, her cheekbones catching the light. But it was her eyes that held him captive. Violet, vivid, and intelligent, they met his with calm certainty. For a heartbeat, Julian could not move. His mind rejected what his eyes saw. This was impossible. Behind him, the church erupted into a storm of whispers, sharp and breathless. Beautiful, deceived, extraordinary. Camilla tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Her voice, meant only for him, was quiet and steady. "Surprised, Your Grace." Julian could not answer. The Archbishop hurried through the final words, clearly unsettled. When he declared them husband and wife and invited Julian to kiss his bride, Julian hesitated, not from revulsion, but from something far more dangerous. Desire surged through him, sudden and unwanted. Their kiss was brief and proper, yet it sent a shock through his body. Applause thundered around them, but Julian heard only his own heartbeat. As they turned to face the congregation, Julian saw the full impact of what had occurred. Society's carefully built assumptions had collapsed in an instant. Sir Reginald Worthington, Camilla's father, sat in the front pew with a satisfied smile that made Julian's unease deepen. As they left the church together, Camilla leaned closer. "I imagine you have questions," she murmured. "That would be an understatement," Julian replied through clenched teeth. "Then we should survive the wedding breakfast first." The celebration at Worthington House was chaos disguised as elegance. Guests who had once pitied the unseen bride now crowded around her, praising her beauty and grace. Julian watched from a distance, his champagne untouched. Nothing about this felt right. Lord Trenton, Julian's closest friend, joined him. "This was not what we expected," Trenton said carefully. "No," Julian answered. "She is remarkable." "What she is," Julian said quietly, "is a deception." Trenton studied him. "Would you have refused the marriage if you had known the truth?" Julian did not answer. Camilla moved through the room with ease, her laughter light, but when she approached Julian later, her eyes were tired. "You look displeased, husband. I have just learned my understanding of the past 8 years was built on lies." "Not lies," she said evenly. "Assumptions." Before he could reply, she turned away. 3 days later, they began the journey to Winterbourne Hall. The ride was stiff and silent. Camilla read. Julian stared out the window. When they spoke, it was only of the weather or the road ahead. As the land grew wilder, Camilla finally spoke. "It is beautiful here. It is unforgiving," Julian replied. "Is that why you needed my father's money?" Julian answered honestly, explaining his father's debts and the looming ruin. Camilla listened without judgment. "And so you sold yourself," she said softly. "I sold my title." There was a pause. "Do you resent marrying me?" Julian chose his words carefully. "I believed I was doing my duty. And now? Now, I am confused." Distance seemed safest to him, but when he said it aloud, he saw the hurt in her eyes. Winterbourne Hall rose before them, ancient and proud. Camilla studied it closely. "How many servants do you employ?" "Fewer than we should." "And how many are honest?" The question startled him. That night they dined alone at opposite ends of a long table. Julian watched her carefully, noticing how little she ate, how tired she seemed. Finally, she asked if he wished to hear the truth. He did. Camilla told him of her youth, of unwanted attention, of a powerful man who cornered her and frightened her deeply. She spoke of her father's failure to protect her and the lie she created to save herself. Julian listened, rage building with every word. "And now he may return," she said quietly. Julian stepped closer, his voice firm. "I will not allow him near you." Her composure cracked, tears filling her eyes. "You would defend me. You are my wife." That night, as Camilla left him alone, Julian realized his careful plans were already unraveling. He had expected a scarred bride and a simple bargain. Instead, he had married a woman whose strength and beauty threatened everything he thought he understood. The weeks after their arrival at Winterbourne Hall settled into a strange and careful rhythm. During the day, Julian buried himself in work. He rode across the estates, met with tenants, examined ledgers, and began the slow task of repairing what years of neglect and debt had damaged. The money Camilla brought had saved Winterbourne from collapse, but pride demanded that he do more than survive. He wanted to restore the land, to prove that his title still meant something beyond an old name. Camilla, meanwhile, took charge of the household with quiet authority. She did not announce changes or demand obedience. She observed. She asked questions. And then she acted. Within the first week, 3 servants were dismissed. One had been stealing silver, another had been altering accounts. The third had been selling estate goods for his own profit. The dismissals were handled discreetly, but the message was unmistakable. The new Duchess of Winterbourne was not to be underestimated. Julian watched all of this with mixed feelings. Admiration came first. Discomfort followed close behind. Camilla was not what he had expected in any way. She was not timid. She was not fragile. She was sharp, composed, and frighteningly capable. And worst of all, he found himself thinking about her when he should not. At night, they kept their distance, separate chambers. Polite dinners, controlled conversation. Julian told himself this was the arrangement they had both agreed upon, but the truth was harder to ignore. Each night, as he lay awake, he knew exactly where she was. Just down the corridor, close enough to hear if she moved, close enough to haunt his thoughts. He noticed, too, her unease with the Morning Post. Each day when letters were brought in, her hands would still. Her eyes searched the pile, as if expecting something dreadful. When nothing appeared, she would relax slightly, but never fully. Julian knew what she feared, and it made his blood burn. One evening, restlessness drove him from his study long after the house had gone quiet. As he passed the music room, he heard it, a pianoforte, played with skill and emotion. The melody was soft and aching, full of longing. He paused at the door and listened. Camilla sat at the instrument, her back to him, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She wore a pale dressing gown, and in the candlelight she looked unreal, like a figure from a dream. She played as if the music were speaking for her, saying everything she never allowed herself to voice. When the final note faded, Julian spoke without thinking. "I did not know you played." Camilla startled and turned sharply, one hand flying to her throat. "You frightened me." "I am sorry. I heard the music." She studied him for a moment, then looked away. "I learned during my years in seclusion. Music kept me company." Julian moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "You play beautifully." She shrugged slightly. It passed the time. Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Julian finally spoke. "Do you regret marrying me?" The question surprised her. She looked at him fully now. "Do you regret marrying me?" He hesitated, then chose honesty. "I regret the circumstances. I regret that necessity bound us. But you, no. You are far more than I expected." "More beautiful," she said quietly. "More complicated." "Yes." She stood, closing the small distance between them. The air seemed to tighten. What if we did not keep our distance, Julian? What if we allowed this marriage to be more than duty? His heart pounded. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She shivered but did not pull away. "That would be dangerous." "Yes." The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Julian leaned closer, drawn by something he had fought for weeks. Then a floorboard creaked above them. Reality rushed back in. Julian stepped away abruptly. "You should return to your chambers." Disappointment flickered across Camilla's face before she masked it. "Of course. Good night, Your Grace." "Good night." As she left, Julian felt as though he had failed something important. He told himself it was for the best, but the lie rang hollow. The following week brought guests from London, a sporting party Julian had arranged long before his marriage. Lord Trenton arrived with several gentlemen, filling Winterbourne with noise and laughter. Camilla greeted them with grace, then withdrew discreetly. That evening, the men gathered for brandy. Conversation drifted, as it always did, toward Julian's marriage. "You are fortunate, Winterbourne," one man said. "Your Duchess is extraordinary." Julian's grip tightened on his glass. Another man laughed lightly. "We were all fooled by those rumors. How did such a deception last so long?" Julian set his glass down sharply. "My wife's past is not for discussion." The room fell silent. Trenton watched him closely. Later, when the others had gone, Trenton spoke. "You are defending her. She is my wife. You care for her." Julian turned away. "I cannot afford to." Trenton's voice was calm but firm. "You are afraid of becoming your father. Afraid of loving deeply and losing everything." Julian said nothing. "Denying yourself happiness out of fear is not strength," Trenton continued. "It is cowardice." The words struck deep. That night, Julian drank too much and made a decision. He would stop pretending. He would speak to Camilla. He would tell her the truth. The next morning, a letter arrived. Julian recognized the seal immediately. Silas Blackthorne, Marquis of Thornfield. His hand shook as he read. The letter was polite, casual, possessive. The Marquis congratulated him on his marriage and announced his intention to visit Winterbourne soon. Julian's blood ran cold. He found Camilla in the still room and handed her the letter, her face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "We are leaving for London," Julian said firmly. "Why?" "Because I will not allow him near you here. In London, I can stop him. You would confront him. I would destroy him if I must." Camilla stared at him, fear and disbelief warring in her eyes. Julian took her hands. "I have not been the husband you deserved. But this I will not ignore. You are under my protection." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. They left that afternoon. The journey to London was tense but filled with quiet planning. 2 days in, Camilla finally asked the question that had been waiting between them. "Why are you doing this?" Julian looked at her steadily. "Because the thought of him near you fills me with rage. Because you deserve safety. And because I care for you more than I intended." The words hung between them. Camilla's eyes filled with tears. "You foolish man. I have cared for you for weeks." Julian moved closer, taking her hand. "I want to try. Truly try." She smiled through her tears. "Then stop keeping me at a distance." He kissed her then, fully, honestly. When they broke apart, breathless and smiling, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over, I will court you properly. I will hold you to that." They arrived in London ready for battle. And Julian knew that what came next would test not only his power, but the fragile new bond between him and the woman he was finally ready to love. London received them with gray skies and restless energy. Winterbourne's townhouse on Grosvenor Square was opened fully for the first time in over a year. Fires were lit, servants recalled, and the household stirred back to life. Julian moved with purpose. He sent messages, called in favors, and requested meetings with men who owed him loyalty or respect. Camilla watched him from a distance, sensing the storm he was gathering. Julian spent days uncovering everything he could about Silas Blackthorne. Debts hidden behind charm. Gambling losses quietly settled by others. 2 wives dead under strange circumstances. Nothing proven, yet everything suggested. The man had lived too long believing himself untouchable. The Marquis arrived exactly 2 weeks later. He was shown into Julian's study late in the afternoon. Camilla sat beside her husband, not behind him. Julian had insisted. She would not hide again. Blackthorne smiled as he entered, his eyes lingering on Camilla. "Duchess Winterbourne, how radiant you are." Julian did not rise. "You will address my wife with respect, Thornfield." The smile thinned. "I merely wished to renew an old acquaintance." "There is no acquaintance to renew," Julian said evenly. "What exists between you and my wife is unwanted history." Blackthorne laughed softly. Such strong words. She was always dramatic. Julian stood then, towering over him. She was a child. You frightened her, you threatened her. And now you believe you may step into my home and claim familiarity. Blackthorne's eyes hardened. "You cannot prove anything." "I do not need to," Julian replied. "I only need to expose enough." He laid documents on the desk, ledgers, Letters. Statements. Blackthorn's color drained. "Leave London," Julian said. "Stay away from my wife. If you do not, I will ruin you." Blackthorn's voice dropped to a hiss. "You make an enemy today." Julian leaned closer. "I already had one. I am simply ending him." The Marquis left without another word. When the door closed, Camilla's strength gave way. Julian caught her as she trembled. "It is over," he said. "He will not return." She clung to him, relief breaking through years of fear. They returned to Winterbourne soon after. The house felt different, lighter. Julian no longer held himself apart. He walked beside Camilla, spoke with her openly, laughed with her. He courted her as he had promised. Long walks, quiet dinners, shared plans. Love grew where fear had once lived. By autumn, Camilla knew she was with child. Julian's joy was fierce and overwhelming. He guarded her gently, proudly, openly. Their daughter was born the following spring, dark-haired with violet eyes. On a warm afternoon, Julian found Camilla in the garden, holding their child beneath blooming roses. "I expected duty," he said softly. "I found everything." Camilla smiled. "So did I." They sat together as the sun warmed the earth, no longer bound by fear or obligation, but by choice. Love had come where neither had expected it, and it stayed.